Hey guys, how's it going? I thought I'd take a little bit of a step back from the gameplay videos and take a little bit of a wider look on how to actually improve as a player at Riftbound. I know that a lot of people are getting into this game for the very first time, excited to pick up a new TCG, or this is their first TCG or something like that. And it's nice to kind of give people an idea of how you want to be improving at Riftbound. So a couple really quick disclaimers. This video is not focused on specific in-game mistakes that are costing you games. All right, so this is not one of those videos where it's top 5 beginner mistakes that are making you lose Riftbound games. All right, this is not something like that. This video is focused on behavior and mindset for improvements, how you want to be approaching your practice, your games, stuff like that. And also, this video assumes that you know the rules and basic gameplay for how to play Riftbound. So you've been playing for at least a week, 2 weeks, something like that, just so I don't have to be explaining rules. You have the basic understanding of how the game of Riftbound works. All right, so first topic I want to get into. How to improve. First, you want to find reputable sources. The average player is not good enough to blindly follow. I don't want to sound like I'm better than anyone, but it's difficult to follow advice that you find randomly online because you don't know how good the person is. And TCG spaces are a space where a lot of people congregate and like to share ideas and enjoy talking about their ideas with the people that are like them. And that's a really, really good thing. But if you are trying to get better at this game, you can't take the average person's advice or the average person's suggestions because you don't know who is good and who is bad. So no X, no Reddit, no random Metafy guides from people that you don't know who they are, and no going onto Piltover Archive and going to random decks and be like, ooh, this one looks good, I'm gonna yoink this, all right? So you don't want to listen to the noise, all right? There's a lot of noise out there, and this noise is gonna distract you from doing the things that you should be doing. So you want to find reputable sources that can show their skill level through their achievements or have the ability to condense complex information. So there's some examples of this. There are current pro players like Challenger TCG channels, the Sam D. Sherman channel, and Prismaticism. And then there's other good educational channels like Recycle2 TCG and then Frodan as well. And of course, I can't forget to mention me. Subscribe. I should probably put a little bit of my qualifications here. Part of this is just to brag, part of it's to introduce myself, and part of them is to just show that I do have merit in the things that I talk about. So there's this Rift Elo or Elo Showdown website that tracks your Elo, and I'm the #1 ranked player in this site in my local area for the past 4 seasons. So that's Origin, Spiritforged, Unleashed, and Vendetta. I got 10th place at the Riftbound Showdown that was held in Ottawa 3 weeks ago. And I was the best of for my legends. And then I also got 38th at the Vancouver Regional Qualifier. And I've also won 12 skirmishes and gotten second place at 5 skirmishes. And some of those are splits and stuff like that. So I have played this game a lot, and I've played a lot of this game, and I have achieved above average in terms of competitive success. So that's why you should listen to me. Subscribe. All right, anyways, on to actual real tips. So how to improve. So first off, what I would recommend is stick to one legend. Riftbound is a very, very difficult game, and you need to hone your fundamentals through the lens of a single deck. So if you watched my Diana coaching video, I talked about a lot of these concepts at the start of the video, just to help my students begin approaching getting better at this game. So there are a lot of fundamentals to learn, and there's a lot of things to learn, generally speaking, about Riftbound as a game. And in order to get good at this game, you need to get good at every single level, every single fundamental, every single thing you need to get very good at. And how do you hone in on each of these fundamentals is you specialize. You specialize in your deck, you specialize in your playstyle, and you learn the game of Riftbound through the lens of this deck. So fundamentals like how to play around point tempo and how your deck interacts with point tempo, aggressive and defensive play patterns, how your deck wants to play, whether it be aggressive or defensively, and how your deck deals with aggressive and defensive play patterns. Your win conditions, your loss conditions. What do I need to do in order to win this game? You need to be able to, as your specialized deck, be looking at any given board state and say, I believe that I'm winning this board state I believe I'm losing this. What conditions do I need to meet in order to win? And what conditions do I need to meet, or what conditions does my opponent need to meet in order for me to lose? You want to have an idea of what matchup spreads look like. All right, so I'm good into this matchup, I'm good into this matchup, I'm bad into this matchup. So how bad is this bad matchup? How good is this good matchup? You need to have an understanding of how to evaluate your deck's matchup spreads and see if there are ways for you to mitigate certain matchups, or figure out when a legend is well positioned for a metagame or not well positioned for a metagame. And you learn this through specializing in your one deck. And then lastly, things like deck optimization. So this is not necessarily something that you'll do right off the bat, but as you begin learning how to deck build and as you begin learning how to optimize your list, whether it be your main board or your sideboard, you can only do this once you have an understanding of how your deck is supposed to play, how your deck is supposed to be piloted, how your deck wants to play into other matchups. And you can only do this through specializing in a deck. So for an example here, this random stat block you see on the bottom here, this is my Origins play rates. These are all the games that I played in Nexus Nights and skirmishes for the entirety of Origins. I played 5 matches of Ahri. I went 2-1 in the first one, and then 0-2 with a bye on my second one. And then I only played Victor. And I became a master of Victor. I was the best Victor player in my local area. And you can only do this when you specialize in a deck. You don't get tempted to play other decks. It's very, very important, because now at the end of Origins, I was very good at Victor, and I was able to kind of identify all these fundamentals and how the Victor deck interacts with all these fundamentals. So you need to build your fundamentals. First things first, you need to build your fundamentals, and then afterwards, then you can start experimenting with other decks, because you can learn how to apply each of these fundamentals and how the new deck interacts with these fundamentals differently from your previous deck. You need to be disciplined for your initial learning, so my suggestion is to stick to one legend for the first entire set that you play, or else your base fundamentals are going to be so shaky and you're not going to be able to establish a strong foundation. So this right here is what I played for Unleashed. I played a ton of legends, and my win rate, if you don't look at some of these, like Jhin, my win rate across the board was quite decent. This is because at a certain point, you can start picking up decks and figuring out how you're supposed to pilot them relatively easily within the first 2 to 3 sets that you play with the deck, right? So you need to establish your fundamental base first, and then you can start experimenting with other decks. I'm not saying to stick with the first deck that you pick up, but what I am saying is once you have enough rules experience and like playing the game in a functional level, you can pick a deck and stick to that for the first set. And hopefully you're going to vibe with this deck enough to be able to stick with it for an entire set. There is no shame in net decking, or copying decks from reputable sources. I would actually highly recommend that for the first few lists that you experiment with, the first few lists that you learn to pilot, they should be copies of decks from reputable sources. Now, why is this? Becoming a competent pilot is the culmination of all the fundamentals that you'll learn. Starting with a deck that you know is good will let you be more critical of your gameplay decisions, and you don't have to be questioning whether or not it's the deck's problem or your problem. The answer is, if you are playing a good deck, the answer is it's your problem. And it's always going to be your problem because you're starting out and you're just learning to play the game, and that's all right. That's what you want to do. You want to be able to identify the faults within your gameplay in order to improve, right? So here I have a couple examples. I have the best of lists from the Barcelona RQ, and then riftdex.com is a really great place to just skim decks, and you can look at standings and stuff. So what I do when I go to Riftdex is I go to the tournament section, I sort by the most relevant tournaments, and then I just go through and I look for the best of list for the legend that I'm interested in playing it, and I just look at it and I just see how I vibe with the deck and if it's something that I would want to try out. And my suggestion is, when you are first starting out the game, I would highly recommend, once you've decided on a legend to play, you just net deck a good copy of the deck and you just play that. You just play it. You know it's good because it's performed well. Now it's on you to become a competent pilot in that deck. Next things next, you need to practice. You need to practice. Practice. You need reps into this game. every single matchup, every single deck you play has specific intricacies that you need to learn in order to play this game at a high level. Obviously, you're capable of playing the game, but with more reps, with more experience, you're going to be able to learn, how do I want to play in this matchup? How do I want to play in this matchup? How does my deck want to play as a general, philosophy? Becoming an efficient pilot is more important than being a good deck builder or a good theorizer. And I just have a little picture of my lifetime stats. These are my lifetime stats. This is like in the range of 600 in-person best of threes that I've played. An analogy that I've heard before, and it's something that I talked about in the Diana coaching video, is everyone wants to be a good deck builder. It's very exciting to be a good deck builder. You're posing new and interesting ideas that you think are underexplored. Something like that is really, really, really fun. But becoming an efficient pilot is more important than being a good deck builder, right? More important. This is like, for example, American football, good old American football. Football is a very, very strategic game. There's a lot of strategy that needs to be done in football as a game. But if you weigh 130 pounds, you're going to die, all right? And becoming a good pilot in Riftbound is essentially becoming massive enough to be able to compete as a good lineman in football. You need to become a good pilot, and then you can start theorizing, and then you can start deck building for yourself. But fundamentally, you need to become a good pilot before you can start improving and expanding into other forms of skill expression, being theorizing and deck building. All right, so what does it mean to practice a bunch? How do I practice effectively? All right, first of all, you need to become an active participant in your practice. You cannot mindlessly run games and just autopilot through your entire way. You need to be an active participant in your practice. All right, so what does that mean? First, you need to learn what kind of balance of learning and practice is the most productive for you. I've heard this before, and I'm not 100% sure if this is the right number, but roughly it should be 20% absorbing knowledge and 80% practicing and trying to apply knowledge. That's a rough heuristic for how we want to be approaching our productive practice. But what is most important is that there's some amount of you that is learning and absorbing information, and then a majority of your time you're spending towards practice and applying the things that you've learned. You want to put yourself into environments that result in the most productive practice. So for me, I really, really do better when I'm doing in-person practice. When I'm doing online practice on Rift Atlas or TCG Arena, it just doesn't hit the same. I feel like I'm autopiloting way more. I'm not making as many good decisions. I feel like my practice partners aren't on the same level as they are in person. So I always try to make sure I put myself in an in-person environment when I'm practicing in with a goal of having productive practice. Next, you want to realize that the person you're sitting in front of, your opponent, is a human and they can make mistakes. So this has two implications. First off, you can't just win a game and be happy that you won a game, all right? You need to actively be analyzing how the game state is and what lines or what potential lines could be made in order to punish the lines that you have made. This is important because as you get better and better at the game, your opponents are going to get better and better as well, and they're going to be able to punish you. And so you can't just play against the actual person sitting in front of you. You need to be playing against the potential person that is playing in front of you, playing that deck at a higher level than your opponent actually is. And second thing is you need to be aware when your opponent makes mistakes, and you want to punish those mistakes. Your opponent is a human, your opponent is going to make mistakes, and you need to adapt to how your opponent is, and you need to engage with them actively in order to learn how to pilot your deck better. You're not playing in a vacuum, you're playing against a real person. So you want to learn what it is like to play against a real person and punish a real person's mistakes. And lastly, what gets measured gets managed. And so it is up to you how you want to be measuring stuff, if you want to be measuring stuff. But most people that are very, very good at the game do track some way, right? And so if you look on the right side of the screen here, I have a little tracker that I have. I have the date that I played the game, the deck that I played, the deck my opponent played, the number of wins, number of losses, and the die rolls. And then I have an optional column off to the side of any notes that I want to put for the game. So man, I played really aggressively around this line that I didn't think that was going to be good, but it turns out that this line was very, very aggressive and maybe I shouldn't do that in the future. Or I played towards this out and I did not get the out, so I lost, stuff like that, right? So, or just like matchup experience, being like, oh, this is the first time I played Draven versus Diana or something like that. And I'd be like, okay, so I felt like I was mostly favored. It was mostly good. This card seems strong. This card seems weak, right? So what gets measured gets managed. So ideally, when you're starting off, you want to set some groundworks for what you want to measure and what the outcomes that you're measuring want to be. All right. So second piece for your practice is you want to seek good practice partners. And when I say good practice partners, I don't necessarily mean the strongest possible person you can play against. Obviously, getting reps into the strongest possible player is a good thing, but my estimation is good practice partners should be roughly like minus 20% to plus 40% within your skill level. Obviously, this is like an arbitrary number, but you can get effective practice against players that are a little bit worse than you, and you can get effective practice with players that are like reasonably better than you. But you won't learn anything playing against people that don't know what they're doing, and you won't learn anything playing against people that can autopilot and still beat you. Like if your opponent is just sitting in front of you, taking their turns in like 30 seconds and beating you handily, this is not really going to be that productive because they're so much higher than you that you don't understand what you're doing wrong. You're doing too many things wrong, and your opponent is punishing everything so hard that there's a certain point in which it's not productive. And lastly, you want to seek practice partners that you can talk to. So you can talk to your opponents after the game to learn their thought process for the games. And this doesn't just apply to your like any dedicated practice partners that you may or may not have. This also goes for Nexus Nights or skirmishes. Usually, as long as you're playing at like a somewhat reasonable pace, you will have time between rounds to chat with your opponent. And I would highly, highly recommend that you just chat with your opponent and get their thoughts, especially if they're more experienced than you. Most people are very, very happy to talk about the game. We're all out here playing Riftbound, enjoying the game, and just having a good chat and spreading knowledge is something that people enjoy doing. So don't feel bad, especially if you lost. Like if you won, be a humble person. Don't start being like, oh, you did this wrong. But like, especially if you lost, just like humbly ask your opponent, is there anything you thought I did wrong? Is there anything that I should have played around that I didn't play around? Or was I too respectful of any options? Stuff like that is like really, really, really productive. And I would highly, highly recommend you do something like that. And number 3, you want to apply knowledge from your learnings. Actively apply knowledge from your learnings. So while you're playing, you want to try to actively apply things that you're learning. So things like funny interactions that you learned of online, interesting rules, interactions, and then general fundamentals and principles. So things like my point tempo video is something that you can look at and try to absorb some information there and be like, okay, today when I sit down, I would love to actively apply point tempo as a concept. I'm going to look at the board state and I'm going to just think about the point tempo. I'm going to see how I can maximize it, how it's affecting the game state, stuff like that. And that's like a really, really good thing to do. Or say you just learned an interesting rules interaction. Let's say you just learned that Elder Dragon, when he hits the board, he targets units at locations. And if units move from those locations, they no longer take the damage. And so there's some really cool stuff that you can do. For example, you can play Tide Turner and switch with something, and then that unit won't take any damage and it won't die. So this is a way that you can apply your knowledge from your learnings. And lastly, number 4, you want to practice with intent. Each practice session ideally should have a goal. Obviously, you're not going to be able to go to every single Nexus night, every single, game that you sit down in front of your friends and be like, okay, I want to practice this specific thing. But ideally, especially with more focused practice, every practice session should have a goal. So you can practice actively applying a fundamental. So something like point tempo is something that you could actively apply to your gameplay. You could utilize a cool rule that you learned about recently. So an example of this could be back when Emperor's Deus was really, really janky and you could pay 0 and bounce the unit back to hand, right? You can really, really, really be thinking about how you can utilize this in your gameplay when you're sitting down with Master Yi. You can try to test how good a card is, right? So let's say I have constructed my Draven deck and I'm really interested in this Gust Monk card. I want to sit down and be like, every time I see this treasure hunter in my hand, how many times out of 10 would I rather this treasure hunter be a gust monk, and how many times out of 10 would I rather this treasure hunter be a treasure hunter? Stuff like that. And then lastly, things like testing a matchup. So I just talked to my buddy, you know, this guy is just picking up Kennen, and I really need to get an understanding of how this Kennen matchup is. I'm gonna be like, hey man, you want to run some games? I want to figure out this matchup, and I'm going to sit down, and while I'm playing this matchup, I'm evaluating my game state and everything and how it's going and the vibes, and see how I'm feeling playing this matchup and whether it's good or whether it's bad. All right. Next, how we want to improve is absorb knowledge. Try to absorb knowledge. So we kind of spoke about this earlier. Roughly 20% of your learnings, or roughly 20% of your time improving, should be from absorbing knowledge, and then about 80% of your time should be practical practice with the knowledge that you've learned. So how do we absorb knowledge? So you can absorb media to import knowledge directly into your brain. So media like mine. Subscribe. There are general videos that you can look for. So videos on fundamentals, videos on playstyles, and then general metagame tier lists are really interesting to learn about. It's interesting to learn about why this deck might be good, why this deck might be bad, how your legends may or may not place within a certain tier list. That's always interesting and usually has results in how it manifests inside of your gameplay. And then there are also legend specific videos. So you can look for specific deck lists, sideboard guides that might be printed for the deck that you're playing with, any tips and tricks for your matchups. So things like, oh, when I have my hidden unit hidden at Starspring, I can treat it as if it's a flash. That's really interesting. So if I view it in terms of it's a flash where I can dodge interaction, that's really interesting, and I might try to apply that the next time I play the game. And then there's also like matchup knowledge. Let's say I think this Draven Kennen matchup is really bad for me, or oh, I think this Draven Diana matchup is really good for me. And then the next time you sit down in front of your Diana, you kind of change the way in which you see this matchup to try and match the way that the person who has been describing this to you has described it, and see if this changes the way that you approach this matchup. See if I can make this matchup feel a little bit better than it did before. Let's say, man, this Irelia matchup, this Draven Irelia matchup is like kind of tricky. I don't really understand how to play it. And then you see a Draven player that says, man, matchup's easy. All you gotta do is this, blah, 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 blah. And then you sit down in front of the next Irelia and you're trying to apply this knowledge that you've imported directly into your brain from someone else telling you, and you might change how you view the matchup and how you're supposed to approach the matchup. A little bit of a disclaimer here, you need to be aware that you may need to pay if you want to accelerate your learning. So a lot of these that I listed above are unfortunately paid. So things like deck lists and like matchup knowledge and like sideboard guides, a lot of these are going to be paid for, which is like kind of annoying, but it is optional. Like anything that's paid is optional. I will do my best to keep all the things I do on here free as long as I reasonably can. Until I start pursuing Riftbound full time, I likely will not be attempting to fully monetize the things that I do on here. But just be aware, especially if you're getting information from professional players, you will likely need to pay in order to accelerate your learning. And the next thing I want to talk about is another important thing for absorbing knowledge is learning rules interactions. Rules interactions are really important. And obviously nobody is going to be like a perfect judge, and nobody's going to know all the rules perfectly, but you do need to know rules interactions because this does affect your gameplay. Knowing certain things about rules will make you play better or worse, or it will make you play better when you know about certain things, and then make you play worse when you don't know about certain things, obviously. So there's like obvious core rules things, like you should know how showdowns function. You should know how the chain and the stack functions. You should know the difference between focus and priority and how focus and priority is passed. And you should know what a trigger is and how triggers work and how you can respond to triggers and when triggers don't work and when triggers do work and when something is a trigger and when something isn't a trigger, right? So these are all important things that you need to know about the core rules, because knowing rules is how you can min-max how you play the game. And then secondly, beyond core rules, you should know kind of strange interactions that you may or may not know about. You may or may not be curious about. So what I have on here is a comment from the video that I posted yesterday about Elder Dragon and Ferris Foreigner. And my commenter here, shout outs to you, asked a very good question, which is, how does the timing work between Elder, Hidden Cards, and Death Knells for the Fairest Foreigner? And I did my best to explain very lengthily how this interaction works. And if you don't know this knowledge, maybe you just make 2 mechs and your unit on the board just dies, right? But I'm able to utilize this knowledge in order to set up more threatening holds that my opponent needs to work harder in order to break the board. So these strange interactions you can utilize very well for your gameplay as well. It's very, very important that you learn them. The way I like to do it is whenever my local Discord puts up a rules question, I'll go and I'll think about it before other people answer it. I'll try to think and what my answer would be, and then compare it to the more reputable judges that will be able to answer that information and compare the answer basically to see how my thoughts are. And then you can just slowly absorb information and try to apply the slowly absorbed information into your brain. All right, next thing I want to talk about is you can Theorycraft. There are going to be a lot of times when you're not playing Riftbound. You know, not everyone is unemployed, lots of people are employed, but a lot of the times there's going to be a lot of downtime in which you're able to think about other things that aren't just your job in front of you, right? Or this random chore that you have in front of you. You can kind of do it and you can think at the same time. And what this helps you do is it helps you approach your next play session or your next practice session with more intent, with an idea of what the outcome that you're looking for is from this practice that you're getting, right? So you can actively test a lot of things. You can think about how your matchups are going to be for your legend and how it's going to be facing this legend, how it's going to be facing this legend. Is there something that you can do differently to make your matchup feel a little bit better? So recently, I've been thinking a lot about the Draven-Kennen matchup. I'm trying to solve, is there anything that I can do better here? And one is like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be siding out these treasure hunters. These treasure hunters seem to actually be quite good. I'm running out of power a lot, and even the games where I'm on Star Tipped Peak and channeling runes, it's really difficult to hold into Kennen. So maybe I can't rely on that in order to offset my power costs. So this is something that I've been thinking about, even though I haven't been able to play Riftbound for the past 24, 48 hours, something like that, right? Next thing is you can test changes in play patterns for certain matchups. So for example, matchup dependent point tempo implications. So this is like kind of wordy, but essentially is, how do I want to approach point tempo in this matchup versus a different matchup? So for my Draven deck, how do I want to approach point tempo when I'm playing against Rek'Sai? How do I want to approach point tempo when I'm playing against Rengar? And how do I want to approach point tempo when I'm playing against Aurora, right? Like these are very, very different things. And some of these decks I'm going to want to play slower, and some of the decks I'm going to want to play faster. And when you are playing, you can analyze the way that you've been approaching point tempo and change your play patterns to speed up or slow down how you've been approaching your point tempo gameplay, essentially. And then lastly, something that you can change is changes in your deck choices. So what should or should not be in my main board? What should or should not be in my sideboard? A really good way to practice this is when I'm sitting down in front of my opponent, how many times would I prefer that this specific card is a different card? Let's say, man, I'm just sitting at work, I'm super bored. Let me just like think about my deck really quick. You know, I'm not really a big fan of this Gust slot. Like this Gust, it does things most of the time, but there's like a lot of times that it's bad. I wonder if it should be a different card. Like I wonder if it should be like a Cleave or like an Against the Odds or a Ride the Wind or something like that. All right, so I'm gonna sit in front of my opponents, and whoever this opponent is, every single time I draw this Gust card, I'm gonna look at the board state. And I'm going to look at this Gust card, and I'm going to think, would I rather this be a Ride the Wind at this very, very moment? Would I rather this be a Cleave at this very moment? And when you play enough games, you'll be able to look at this card in your hand and say, I'm happy that this card is a Gust, or I'm unhappy that this card is Gust. And you can do this for your main deck or your side deck. This type of gameplay where I'm looking at a certain card in my hand is more of a main deck thing. And then sideboard is like, I'm going to sit in front of an opponent and be like, man, my sideboard is not ready for this matchup. Is there a way that I can change my sideboard for me to be a little bit more prepared for this matchup? So theory crafting is a fantastic way to get better while you're not playing. Not everyone has all the time in the world to practice Riftbound. A lot of times you have a lot of downtime where you're not playing Riftbound, and if you want to improve, you'll need to be able to utilize some of that time in a productive way in order to get better at Riftbound. And lastly, my tip for you, be patient. Be patient with yourself. It's difficult to see great strides in improvement at the start. And the reason for this is because you're bad and everyone else is good. So let's say everyone else around you is a 5 out of 10 in terms of how good they are, and you are a 1 out of 10 in terms of how good you are. As you get better, let's say you go from a 1 to a 3, you've gotten a lot better, you got a ton better, but you're still not really gonna be able to beat the 5 out of 10s. It's only once you get to 4 or 5 out of 10 will you be able to start winning against these opponents, and your improvements will be able to begin showing. But you need to trust the process. As long as you are an active participant in your practice, an active participant in your learning, you need to trust that you are getting better at the game, even if you don't see the results right away. And this last thing I want to leave this with is utilize the resources that you have access to. Not only is this resources like media in terms of videos and written guides and whatever online, but utilize the people around you. People are happy to talk about Riftbound. Riftbound's a lot of fun to play, and matchups are always very, very interesting. Decks are always very, very interesting. People are happy to talk about the game. So just talk to the people around you, make some friends, and just chat, learn some things. People are resources, and you can incidentally make some friends while you're playing as well. And lastly, this last image that I want to show you is my first few sets as Victor in Origins. This is kind of where I started. Obviously, my win rate was like kind of decent because everyone was bad at the start of Origins, so it was a little bit easier to steal wins here and there, but I was like pretty focused on getting better at the game. You see most of these I have relatively extensive notes on what I did wrong, what I could do better, stuff like that. So yeah, like take your time getting better, be patient with yourself. Just be aware that as long as your process is correct and you're approaching learning in the correct way, you will be getting better and you will see results at some point. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed watching. I hope it was helpful for you. And if you have any questions or anything like that, just let me know. Thanks for watching.